Porter Wagoner was one of those names that people in country music circles used to speak about with a fond smile and genuine warmth. Even today, folks who were around in the heyday of classic country recall his sparkling stage outfits, his gentle but unforgettable voice, and the way he carried himself like a friend dropping by for a chat. Though he achieved fame decades ago, his later years still resonate with so many who watched him grow from a small-town dreamer into a genuine cultural icon. Yet, as much as he glittered beneath those stage lights, Porter's final chapter revealed a deeply human story of resilience, heartbreak, and lasting impact. Today, his name carries echoes of an era that shaped country music into what it is now, and his life story, particularly those last years, offers lessons about devotion, humility, and the often complicated reality of holding on to hope. Porter was born in the small Ozarks town of West Plains, Missouri, back in 1927, a time when rural America was just beginning to tune into the new wave of radio broadcasts that brought music and entertainment into the living room. From an early age, he found solace and purpose in the sounds of old-time country, humming along to Jimmy Rogers records and learning to play guitar on his front porch. It was the era when the Grand Ole Opry was rising in fame, and country stars were forging an identity that stood somewhere between working-class grit and down-home hospitality. By the time Porter got his first real gig singing on local radio, the country music scene was quietly inching toward a golden age. People in those tight-knit communities gathered around big wooden radios to hear the latest tunes, and up-and-coming artists like Porter found themselves with a small but dedicated audience. In the 1950s and early 1960s, as Porter gained more attention, country music itself was expanding beyond its regional roots. Mainstream audiences grew curious about the twang and honesty of songs that spoke plainly of family, heartbreak, and rural life. During this period, Porter realized that the music business was shifting. Record labels were investing in new talent, and television was becoming a powerful medium to reach fans. Determined not to let the wave pass him by, Porter developed a dynamic persona, both in his musical style and his carefully crafted stage image. And although he was initially overshadowed by some bigger Nashville names, he brought a kind of heartfelt sincerity that would soon find an ever-widening audience. His golden, high-tenor voice somehow captured both the pain of a broken heart and the sweetness of a comforting lullaby, reminding listeners of their own humble roots. By the mid-1960s, Porter had not only established himself with chart-topping songs, but also landed his own television program, The Porter Wagoner Show. This was no small feat. Television was a relatively new platform for country artists, and few had managed to create a show that truly connected with a broad audience. Yet Porter's approach was simple: invite viewers into a friendly, welcoming space, mix in a few jokes, give the band a chance to shine, and let the music speak for itself. The show's success paved the way for other country acts to venture into TV, further legitimizing the genre for mainstream audiences. He wore those now famous rhinestone-encrusted nudie suits that became his signature, reflecting a bright personality that charmed fans from coast to coast. Behind that sparkly exterior, though, was a man deeply committed to the power of a good story, whether it was a silly comedy skit or a poignant country ballad that felt like a piece of someone's life. Even while hosting this beloved show, Porter remained dedicated to recording and releasing new music. The Cold Hard Facts of Life, which came out in 1967, struck a particularly haunting chord with listeners. The rawness of the lyrics and Porter's emotional delivery underscored his willingness to explore heartbreak and human vulnerability, weaving a narrative that went beyond the typical country heartbreak theme. Around the same time, he recorded Green, Green Grass of Home, which also became an enduring country staple. These were achievements that pointed to his unique artistry. Many would consider them highlight moments of his career, but they were by no means the only ones. One lesser-known project from that era took shape in the early 1970s, when Porter experimented with blending gospel-inspired harmonies into traditional country ballads for a handful of church benefit concerts. He worked with small-town choirs and local musicians, often traveling to remote areas that rarely saw famous performers. Even though these concerts didn't always get the big headlines, Porter saw them as a chance to connect with people who might otherwise feel overlooked. Audiences remember him leaving the stage after each show, spending time just talking, listening to their stories, and sharing his own struggles. These events never made him rich, but they offered a deeply personal fulfillment he treasured. Another rarely discussed chapter of his career involved his collaboration with a then-struggling songwriter who only managed to cut a few demos before nearly giving up on Nashville. Porter invited this young songwriter to pen a couple of tracks for his new album, offering the guy a chance to gain exposure. Though that songwriter never became a household name, Porter's generosity in nurturing raw talent reflected the empathy that fueled much of his life. Family, friends, and bandmates alike often spoke of how Porter would quietly pass on what he'd learned over the years, giving others a fighting chance in the cutthroat music business. Sometimes those efforts bore fruit, other times they didn't, but it was a testament to who he was behind the scenes. Over time, though, as country music embraced new sounds and new faces, Porter confronted the reality of an ever-changing industry. A rising generation of artists brought different influences, rock, pop, or folk stylings, and the musical landscape shifted considerably by the late 1970s. Meanwhile, the Porter Wagoner Show saw declining ratings, partly because of that generational shift and partly because television audiences were changing their viewing habits. He continued to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, though many fans sensed that mainstream attention was shifting away. Porter, for his part, tried to adapt while staying true to the storytelling roots that had made him beloved in the first place. Some critics saw him as too old-fashioned, while others admired him for standing his ground, even if his commercial star power began to fade. During this period, fans noticed that Porter's once relentless touring schedule became sporadic. As some in his circle recall, he started showing signs of exhaustion. The demands of constant travel, nightly performances, and business responsibilities began weighing on him both physically and emotionally. He was also grappling with a lingering heartbreak from losing longtime creative partners and facing personal conflicts. Most famously, the tension that arose after Dolly Parton, his on-stage partner and protege, decided to pursue her solo career in the 1970s. Their split became one of the biggest controversies of his career. Although Dolly herself credited Porter for giving her a major break, rumors circulated about disagreements over finances and artistic direction. For some fans, it felt like a betrayal. For others, it was simply a necessary step for Dolly's independent success. Looking back, many realized both were struggling to balance personal ambition with professional loyalty. In later interviews, Dolly recalled that despite the disagreements, she always admired Porter's instincts and generosity, even dedicating a heartfelt tribute to him when she was inducted into certain honors. This complicated relationship continued to be a topic of public debate for years, revealing the emotional complexities behind the scenes. By the 1980s and 1990s, Porter's finances began to look uncertain. He had invested in multiple ventures, some successful, some less so, and the cost of maintaining his signature style of production and performance took a toll. With fewer hit records and diminishing TV opportunities, Porter found himself leaning more on the Grand Ole Opry as a steady gig as well as the occasional tour. Friends remember that he never entirely lost his optimism, though. Despite the growing challenges, he remained the eternal showman at heart, offering up that wide grin from the stage, greeting fans, signing autographs, and telling old stories about his earliest days in the business. He found solace, too, in recalling how far he'd come from that tiny Missouri hometown. Still, age and health concerns loomed. Porter began to complain about persistent breathing issues in the mid-2000s, but he tried to keep it hidden from most folks. He came from a generation that prided itself on not wanting to burden others. It wasn't until a close friend insisted he see a doctor that Porter received the devastating news. He had lung cancer, and it was already in an advanced stage. The timing was heartbreakingly ironic, because around the same time he'd released an album that critics hailed as a return to form. There was fresh excitement in the air, a feeling that maybe he could reconnect with a modern audience that had, in some ways, rediscovered traditional country sounds. Younger artists were beginning to cite him as an influence, and it seemed like a second wind for a career that many had considered dormant. But the lung cancer diagnosis changed everything, forcing Porter to confront the reality that the curtain might be coming down sooner than he'd ever imagined. Those close to him recall how initially Porter was determined to fight. He went through treatment regimens, canceled shows only when absolutely necessary, and tried to maintain an upbeat presence whenever he could. Sometimes he'd joke about his situation, telling fans he wasn't done singing yet. But behind that brave face, he was struggling. The cost of medical care, combined with already precarious finances, led to mounting bills that Porter found harder and harder to meet. It's a detail that surprises many people today, given his iconic status, but the truth is that fame doesn't guarantee financial security, especially if one's career peaks had come decades earlier. Some insiders quietly tried to organize benefit concerts, though Porter, ever the proud entertainer, resisted anything that might feel like a handout. He believed he should face his trials with the same dignity he brought to his music. Amid these struggles, a few poignant moments stand out. One night at the Opry, Porter arrived backstage looking frail, but when it was time to go on, he straightened up and walked out wearing one of his dazzling suits. The crowd erupted into applause. Observers say you could sense how deeply he felt that song's longing and nostalgia. It was almost like he knew his days might be limited, and he was already mourning the loss of this life he loved so dearly. Younger country stars who happened to be backstage that evening later described the moment as profoundly moving, a reminder that legends are, beneath the surface, human beings with fears, regrets, and a fierce desire to keep doing what they love. Friends and family banded together in his final months. His sister Ruth traveled to Nashville to help manage doctor visits, while a few key members of his old band stayed close, offering emotional support. Dolly Parton, despite the complicated history they shared, famously visited him in the hospital and expressed her gratitude for his early guidance and unwavering passion for country music. Those visits were among the most emotional of Porter's last days, testaments to a bond that, while strained by past disagreements, still meant a great deal to them both. One of Porter's nephews later remembered that, during a quiet moment, Porter said something along the lines of, "I started in music because I loved the stories, and I'm leaving music with just as many stories to tell." That line, true or not to the letter, captured the essence of how Porter saw his life, a tapestry of heartfelt narratives, some joyous, some painful, all woven together by that bright thread of music. Of course, not everyone viewed his final year with rose-colored glasses. A few people felt that Porter's attempts to remain in the spotlight, even while gravely ill, represented a refusal to accept his limits. A few critics questioned whether, given the state of his health, he should have stepped back gracefully rather than pushing himself to perform on stage. Others argued that he had every right to keep sharing his gift until he physically couldn't anymore, pointing out that country music was his lifeblood. This minor controversy played out mostly in fan forums and occasional newspaper columns, illustrating the emotional intensity that follows an iconic artist nearing the end of his journey. Some fans, especially older ones who had grown up with Porter's music, felt protective over him, insisting that he deserved to end his days on his own terms. Others worried that he might tarnish his legacy by performing when he was no longer at his best. All these opinions mingled in the public domain, reflecting the complicated nature of adoration, nostalgia, and concern for a beloved star. When Porter passed away, the news of his death felt like a heavy blow to many in the country music world. He had been 80 years old, and by the end, ravaged by late-stage lung cancer and the struggle of financial hardship. It was difficult for people to fathom how an icon like Porter, who had once packed concert halls and topped the charts, could face such heartbreaking trials in his last days. And yet those struggles also gave his story a layer of human depth that resonates strongly today. There's a humility in realizing that no level of fame or success guarantees an easy final chapter. In a sense, Porter's journey reminds us how fragile life can be and how uncertain the path is for even the biggest talents. Looking back, we see that Porter's name remains woven into the wider cultural tapestry, especially for those who experienced the golden age of country music firsthand. His influence can still be heard in the work of modern country and Americana artists who value storytelling and emotional honesty. The sincerity that marked Porter's performances in the 1960s and 1970s feels especially relevant today, in a time when people long for authenticity and genuine connection. The fact that a man with his bright suits and earnest heart could capture the public's attention speaks to the timeless appeal of vulnerability expressed through music. And indeed, many older viewers on YouTube or listeners tuning into classic country radio stations continue to seek out his live clips and old television segments. They yearn for that sense of closeness he imparted, a gentle reminder of simpler times and old-fashioned values. In understanding his legacy is not just the number of hits or awards that stand out. He showed that country music wasn't just about commercial success or chasing trends. It was about connecting with real human experience, capturing life's joys and sorrows in a way that offered comfort and camaraderie. Reflecting on that sense of community is especially important now, given how easy it is to feel disconnected in a rapidly changing world. His life story resonates with older audiences precisely because it mirrors the arcs of their own lives, complete with heartbreak, perseverance, fleeting moments of glory, and the inevitable slowing down of age. It's also significant that Porter's later years were marked by attempts at creative reinvention. Take, for instance, that final album he released not long before his diagnosis. Though it didn't make huge waves in mainstream circles, it was embraced by devoted fans and connoisseurs of classic country who recognized Porter's spark had returned. Produced with a back-to-basics approach, the record felt like a breath of fresh air in an industry sometimes overshadowed by polished pop crossovers. It was one more testament to his artistry and determination, even as his health failed him. That album now serves as a bittersweet time capsule, a reminder that Porter never stopped pursuing the music he loved, no matter the barriers. When people talk about the controversies that followed him, particularly the split from Dolly Parton, some wonder if these overshadow his contributions. But time and Dolly's own words have reframed that narrative. In interviews years later, Dolly expressed profound gratitude for Porter's mentoring and passion for his craft, despite the difficult chapters. Sometimes it takes decades to see these relationships in a clearer, kinder light, and fans who once felt divided have largely come to appreciate the complex bond they shared. Their collaboration, after all, left a lasting imprint on country music, influencing countless duets and partnerships that came after. The swirl of public debates and conflicting rumors ultimately becomes part of the tapestry, a reminder that behind every beloved entertainer, there are real humans navigating real conflicts. Why should modern audiences, particularly those who remember the golden days of Opry broadcasts or who now tune in on YouTube, care about Porter Wagoner's later life and legacy? Perhaps it's because his experiences shine a light on the fragility of stardom and the resilience required to keep going. He belonged to an era when country music was a lifeline for rural families, a friend to the lonely, a voice for the working class. As times changed, he evolved along with them, sometimes gracefully, sometimes painfully. In an industry that so often moves on to the next big thing, Porter remained steadfast in his devotion to the stories that first inspired him as a young boy in Missouri. His financial and health battles toward the end reveal a person whose dream, while battered, never truly dimmed. Many older viewers recognize in his journey a reflection of their own ups and downs, moments of triumph overshadowed by loss, or cherished memories occasionally marred by regret. Furthermore, Porter's example is a guidepost for understanding how celebrity culture interacts with genuine human fragility. It's one thing to see someone with rhinestones and sold-out shows. It's another to discover that behind the glamour lies the same mortal coil we all carry. His final years highlight what truly matters: the relationships we build, the empathy we show, and the songs we leave behind for others to find solace in. That's a lesson relevant well beyond the confines of Nashville or country music. It speaks to anyone who has ever chased a dream, weathered adversity, and hoped to leave a meaningful imprint on the world. Memorials for Porter took shape in various ways. The Grand Ole Opry paid tribute by dedicating segments of performances to him. Longtime fans recounted their fondest memories, from hearing his voice on the crackling radio in the kitchen to seeing him at local fairs. Some contemporary artists paid homage with heartfelt covers of his most beloved tracks, bridging generations and showing how his influence persisted. But for all the tributes and tears, perhaps the greatest testament to his significance is how his spirit of generosity endures in the stories told by younger musicians he mentored. They speak of him not as a distant legend, but as a real person who extended a hand when others might have turned them away, encouraging them to believe in the possibility of their own talents. In reflecting on his life, one can't help but be moved by the resilience Porter displayed, especially in his final act. Even as he grappled with serious health concerns and financial burdens, he strove to share his music with anyone willing to listen. Think of that image of him stepping onto the Opry stage despite being frail, determined to stand under those bright lights one more time. There's a quiet heroism in that gesture, an act that says, "This is who I am, and I won't let go of my passion until I absolutely must." It's a sentiment that resonates powerfully with an older audience, many of whom understand the weight of aging, illness, and regret all too well. There's real comfort in knowing that a legacy built on sincerity and warmth can endure long after the spotlight has dimmed. We can listen to those old recordings or watch clips of the Porter Wagoner show and be transported back to a time when country music was about honest stories, lively fiddles, and a host who seemed genuinely glad to have you around. It might bring a tear or two to the eye, but there's solace in that tear. It signifies that even though Porter faced a heartbreaking end, lung cancer, and financial woes, his spirit left us with more than a lifetime of memories. It offered a blueprint for how a person can strive, fail, recover, and strive again, all without losing a fundamental sense of compassion for others. And for older viewers who grew up with that warmth, it stands as a comforting reminder that in the grand narrative of human existence, kindness, passion, and a well-told story resonate far deeper than any fleeting success. In the end, we're left with the image of a man who once stood proudly in a glittering suit, microphone in hand, greeting the world with a genuine smile. Maybe that's how we'll best remember Porter Wagoner, a dreamer who soared high, stumbled along the way, but poured his heart out every time he stepped on stage. His later life, marked by both hardship and an undying will to share his music, underscores why his legacy matters. It's a reminder that greatness doesn't always arrive in a clean, tidy package. It's forged in the messy, heartfelt struggles that test our courage. Porter showed us that a life devoted to stories and songs can echo across generations, giving comfort and joy to listeners who, in their own quiet moments, hear something that echoes their own experiences. That final bow he took might have been laden with sadness, but it doesn't erase the decades of love and artistry that came before it. Instead, it highlights the depth of his humanity, calling us to treasure the intangible bond that forms when a performer truly connects with an audience. And that bond, once formed, can endure forever. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.